This is a Willets Point Shea Stadium bound 7 express train. The next and last stop is Willets Point, Shea Stadium.
Carlos Ortiz is speaking what I've been thinking about over the last day. The first thing that I thought about was, could the Mets possibly now take the money that they were going to offer, and probably not all of it, but take some of that money now that they were going to offer Yamamoto and put that towards an extension this offseason for a Pete Alonso?
It's an interesting thought. I think what sometimes with Steve Cohen and people thinking of him as like this, magical owner who's going to spend an infinite amount of money. I think he's demonstrated that he's going to spend and he's going to pay for players or pay for things, whether they're resources for player development, whatever it is. He's going to pay the necessary cost, right? And it's not a situation of like, okay, well, maybe if they don't do this, they'll do that. I don't know. I don't look at it necessarily like just because they didn't get Yamamoto or they could save some money and use it toward Pete Alonso. I think, and I have to do a lot more reporting on this before I feel 100% comfortable with this thought. But my thought is that they have an idea already of like what they want to do there, and they had that idea whether Yamamoto is signed or not. And I think that's part of like what you have to think about when you're in ownership and when you're part of the baseball operations is what is like your vision for these types of players. Now they're not going to probably share those because it doesn't help them and in leverage
Yeah.
situations or anything like that, right? So we don't really know, but I'm sure they have a working idea already, and they already had one. But we'll see. With Pete Alonso, talks between players and agents and teams for extensions, they don't really get into gear until sometimes it happens in January, like we saw last year a little bit with Jeff McNeil, and we saw across baseball when guys are finalizing arbitration dates and that kind of thing. But sometimes we don't see it until a little bit before spring training and into spring training, and then we see guys declare like, okay, I'm not talking about this because the season started. We see that every year, right? I'm sure that will happen on some teams, maybe the Mets, who knows? But for right now, it's one of those where we don't know because it's just not that time of year yet. And I think maybe we'll start to learn a little bit more about Alonso's situation and what to expect maybe next month and into spring training for sure. But again, when somebody hires Scott Boras, the indication by all means is he's probably going to go to free agency. He's probably going to test the market. That's what history suggests. There have been some examples of that not being the case. But even if it does end up him going to free agency, that also doesn't rule the Mets out for re-signing him, right? So there's a lot still up in the air when it comes to Pete Alonso, and we're just not at the time of year where we even have shreds of information to make educated guesses, or we don't really have the reporting done to really think about exactly where things are at right now with him.
It doesn't seem like, it used to, like back in the days where if the player didn't get his extension, he's like, I'm not going to do this I'm not going to talk about until free agency, that they would usually leave the team. We didn't get that with Brandon Nimmo. He stayed here after, testing the waters out in free agency. It kind of seems like like more business than usual, than players taking it to heart where, a team may not sign them. I assume that Alonso knew what the Mets were getting into this offseason with having to rebuild the rotation and get some pieces for the bullpen. So I would assume that he would give them every opportunity to bring him back, even if it does hit the free agency next offseason.
Well, he hired Scott Boras for a reason, right? And that was before this winter, or right at the start of the winter, whatever it occurred. Hired him for a reason. Like he's trying to do his thing, and he's trying to get paid, and he's trying to get what he thinks he deserves in this market, just like how any of us would in our professions or our industries, whatever it is, right? That's good. That's what he should be doing. So yeah, I'm with you. I don't think it will be a sign of like, okay, then they're definitely not going to get him. We've already seen that that's not the case, where they could re-sign him. Question that's, I think, more interesting for me is, how does David Stearns in this front office view him going forward? Because this is something that No, frankly, David Stearns has not had to encounter. He has not had a first baseman like this where you have to judge somebody who brings elite power, but you have to say to yourself, okay, how is this guy going to age?
Hmm.
How is this skill set going to age? Could we get that sort of power elsewhere? Or is it that valuable where we have to pay for him? How much do you factor into how important he is just in terms of the New York Mets culture and just him being a big fan favorite and what he's done for the city, that type of thing, what he could do for the city down the road, whatever the case is. That's the part to me that's most fascinating because we have not seen David Stearns encounter those situations, and so that's what's most interesting to me.